stress is something that affects a lot of us, and I have seen this impact, specifically different from men and women. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about women's mental health. So in today's webinar, I want to start with one of our very own, founder of this amazing initiative, Aanchal Vashistha, followed by Tracie, who is representing women in technology as a CEO. And lastly, we have Jessie Brar, who's representing the South Asian community and a local leader as well. So on that note, I want to turn it over to my very own founder and boss, Aanchal Vashistha.
Hi guys, it's such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. My name is Aanchal. I'm the founder of Reach Out Together. We are a social nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness for mental health. We founded the organization about 2.5 years ago after my twin brother passed away to suicide. But I did grow up in Nigeria. And the reason why I wanted to initiate this discussion today on International Women's Day and empower not just women, but also men, is because growing up in Nigeria, there was a culture that we were raised in. But because I was raised around two amazing brothers, I was empowered to do things that a lot of my friends were not. And as grateful as I am for that support, I deserve every girl should have that support, whether it's through their parents, their friends, their boyfriend, their other half. Having said that, I wanted to quickly talk about a perspective that helped me. And I wanted to share that with you. When it comes to suicide loss, it's a very different way of healing. And quite often, people blame themselves for what has happened because they feel like, I didn't understand this person. I was not there for them. The signs were there, but like I can't believe that I was not fully, I didn't understand it. I didn't see it. I was one of those people for at least the first 6 months. And there was an exercise that I did, and I had the biggest shift internally. And I wanted to share that with you. One day in Christmas, the same year that my brother passed away, Tushar, I went to a church. I'm not Christian, but I wanted to go. I wanted to see the whole environment, the energy. There were around 500 people there. And right at the entrance, we were all given a candle. So there are 500 people sitting in rows, and I have a candle. There's a person beside me. There's a person on the other side of me, and each one of us have a candle, right? So the person at the front lights his candle, then the other person lights his candle, then the person lights his. And eventually, the whole room got lit up. Now it's my turn, and I'm standing right here. I'm in darkness. I put out my candle, and the person who was beside me, he put out his candle, and he lit mine. Then I turned, and I lit the other girl's candle who was beside me. And it was in that moment I had a realization. I burst out in tears, but I felt so empowered by just doing that. It was in that moment I realized when we are in darkness, in order for someone to light up that darkness, we have to reach out. You have to put out your candle. That's the only time someone else can light that candle to take care of that darkness. And I did everything in my power at the age of 24 to support my brother, given what I had seen and given the knowledge I had. So what I want to say is, if you're not well, get the right support system to feel empowered to put out your candle so someone can help light it up. So thank you so much for joining us once again. I would very much like to call upon Saeed once again to lead the next talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Aanchal. Very powerful. Very, very powerful. Next up, I want to do a little bit of a warm introduction of our next speaker, Jessie Brar, who is a young South Asian mental health advocate and a public speaker. After struggling with her own mental health for many years, she created the Mental Health Spotlight. Their handle is at the MH Spotlight. It's a platform dedicated to raising awareness about mental health through digital storytelling and sharing of resources. As a public speaker, she has worked with many organizations to bring the mental health conversation to the forefront, including, and I would love to hear a little bit more if time allows, but she's worked with the UK government, where she hosted the Child and Youth Workstream and of the Global Ministerial Mental Health Summit, and spoke to the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge regarding mental health in young people. So Jessie, I would love to turn this to you.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm super, super excited. My name is Jessie. I have been working in the mental health space for quite some time now, and I guess what fired me up and what fueled me to get into the space was my own struggle with my mental health. So growing up, I am from a Punjabi background, grew up here in Canada, born and raised, but there was always kind of that cultural clash where I wasn't quite Canadian enough for the Canadian people, not really Indian enough for the Indians, and I was kind of stuck in this in-between space, which was really tough to deal with. And I had a lot of family issues as well. So my father is actually an alcoholic, and this caused a lot of strain on our family and everything that was going on. And for about 11 years, so I'm the oldest of 3 children, so until I was about 11, we lived with my father, and that caused a lot of trauma in my life. So growing up around someone who is an alcoholic, you see them act like not themselves. You're not really sure what's going on. And at that young age, I had no idea what was happening, but I was so, so thankful for my mother. My mother is probably one of the strongest women I have ever met in my life. She saw what was going on, and in a culture where women are raised to live for first their parents, then their husbands, and their children, she saw that this wasn't okay, and this wasn't okay for her, and it wasn't okay for her kids. And so she moved out. She had no money with her. It was just her and her 3 kids, and she decided she was just going to figure it out. And we moved away from my father, away from all of that trauma, and I watched my mom as she was raising these 3 kids on her own, and it was incredible. Like, I had no idea how she was able to do this. She never let us feel like we were living in that single parent household. And as the oldest, I saw my mom was going through a lot. I knew that there was, our house was a little different than the people around us. And I was struggling with my mental health at the same time. So I think it started when I was around 8 years old, which is pretty young, but typical onset for mental illness is about 14 to 24-ish, that like young adolescent to early adulthood age. And I was struggling, but I had no idea who to talk to. And I would see my mom, and I would see that I'm like, this woman is working so many hours a day. She has so many other things to worry about. I can't put another thing on her plate. I didn't want to be another burden that she had to worry about. So I decided I was just going to suck it up and go through it and just get through it. I had my support system. I would have my ups and downs. I would have bad days, but I always had my family around me, and they always kind of took care of me when I was feeling low. We had no idea what was going on. We just all knew we were kind of in this together. And as I got older, in about grade 11, I actually went to a psychology class, and it was my first ever psych class, and I'm sitting there, and they're talking about the signs of depression, signs of anxiety, and I'm like sitting there, I'm like, oh, okay, sure, that sounds familiar, and that sounds familiar, and I'm like, oh, okay, so what's been going on with me has a name, which was first really, really scary, because I was like, oh my God, I'm sick. But then after I realized, you know what? If there's a name for it, if there's other people talking about it, I can't be the only one. So that gave me a little bit of comfort. And I went to my mom that day, and my mom, like I said, is my biggest inspiration. She's the kindest, sweetest human being. And I went up to her and I was like, Mom, I don't really know what's going on, but I heard about these terms in class today, and I think I'm depressed. And she looked at me and she's like, you're 16, first of all, and you've got straight A's, you've got a great group of friends, your family loves you. What do you have to be depressed about? And it wasn't her accusing me of anything. She just genuinely didn't understand. And I sat there and I was like, you know what? I don't know either. I'm like, I don't have anything to be depressed about, but I still feel this way. I'm still having those symptoms. And so I guess I tried to convince myself that it wasn't really real. Because I just couldn't find a cause. I couldn't find a reason anymore. I'm like, I'm not living in a household where I have an alcoholic father who's causing fights and causing drama, and the trauma around me isn't there anymore. So why is this happening? And I brushed to the side, continued on, ended up getting to the university of my dreams, and moved 3 hours away from home. So it was the first time I was truly on my own. So I was so used to having my family around, and I don't know if there are any people who are a little bit younger, but going to university is a time where you're experiencing a lot of new things. You have a newfound freedom. A lot of people are trying alcohol for the first time. People are being introduced to these new schedules where you have class maybe 2 hours a day and then another 22 hours to do whatever you want, and you have to figure it out. So first year was really, really hard for me because I was struggling. I was still feeling those symptoms of depression, but I had no longer had my family to talk to. And so first year I started to kind of downward spiral. I was drinking a lot. I was kind of going out and partying, using whatever I could find to fill in those gaps that I was feeling. And it got to the point where I was staying up all night, going out partying from like Monday till basically like Saturday evening, and then sleeping all day. So I'd miss all my classes and I was falling behind. I failed my first class ever. I went from being straight A student to failing things, and I had no idea how to deal with that. And it went on for quite some time. The people around me, they noticed changes, but they had no idea how to talk to me about it. So they were like, we know something's going on. And they would ask me like, are you okay? And I would say, yeah, I'm fine, and just brush it off. And then they had no idea what they could do further. And I came home from first year and got reintegrated back into my family, living at home again. And so I felt a little better. And then when I went in for second year, all of those things came crashing back down. And one day I actually am so thankful for this weird coincidence that happened. I ended up in a presentation with a bunch of first year students. They had no idea where they were going. They're like, hey, miss, can you just point me in this direction? And I like walked them to the auditorium, and then it was at that point where it would be awkward if I left because people were talking. So I just sat down and decided I was going to stay for the first 10 minutes of the presentation, and then whenever there was a break, I'd leave. And it was actually two South Asian males who came up and started talking about mental health. They were talking about how they had struggled, how they also came from a family where there was a lot of pressure on them, how they didn't know who to talk to, and in first year, how they'd resulted or they'd used other things to try and fill those gaps in them. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, you know what, this sounds just like me. And as they continued on, they talked about how they ended up going to see a counselor, how they found help, and how they were up here now talking to a room full of thousands of people about what mental health is and why it's important. And I sat there and I was like, you know what, if they can do it, maybe I can too. And so that's what kind of kickstarted me into getting help and on that journey to recovery. And it wasn't an easy one by any means. There was a lot of trial and error. It was taking medication, feeling sick because of it, trying a new medication, going to therapy, not liking my therapist, deciding it wasn't for me, all of this stuff, finally finding something that works, sticking to it for 6 months, and then relapsing and doing this whole cycle over again. And it took a really, really long time to get to a place where I was finally feeling like myself again. And in that time, I realized that it's so important for us to have conversations like this. A lot of times we confuse mental health and mental illness. We think that mental health is something that is only for the mentally ill. So mental illness is something that affects 1 in 5 Canadians around the world. So that's a pretty high stat. If you look around, you interact with way more than 5 people in a day. Like someone you know has been touched by mental illness. But mental health is something that every single person has. So it's on a spectrum, just like our physical health. We can be healthy one day, and then suddenly something comes up and we might be a little bit stressed or struggling or in a crisis. And there are supports available, but those aren't as widely acknowledged. So I saw this and I took kind of these two ideas of there's support available, but we don't know what it is. People are going through this, but we all think we're alone. How can we get this to the community? And I was working with an organization called jack.org, which is also where I work right now full time. And I attended one of their conferences as a delegate. And after the conference, I was like, something needs to change. And we were having these conversations in the room full of people. I was looking around and no one really looked like me. And I was like, for me, what it took was having someone who looked like me, who understood my background, who understood this kind of tug and pull I had between being Canadian and being Indian and growing up here, but not really fitting in. And I was like, you know what? I want a space for those type of people, people like me. And I couldn't find a space. I searched far and wide and was like, if I can't find it, I guess I'll just make one. And that's how the Mental Health Spotlight came about. So really, it's just a place for us to have these conversations because they are important. Everyone has a story, whether you're someone who struggles, whether you're someone who is an ally or caring for someone, or just an everyday person. These are conversations we should be having with each other. So I started about 2 years ago, and each day we're building new people, we're helping integrate that community, and it's led me to kind of share my story around the world, which is super, super cool, doing conferences like this online. And I guess one of the most important ones I got to do was last year. I got to speak at the Global Ministerial Mental Health Summit in London, England, which was super, super cool. And basically, I just had no idea. So one of the things I learned from that summit was, for the longest time, I used to see my mental illness as my biggest weakness. So I was always cursing at the world, being like, why would you make me this way? I've done everything right. I was super good in school. I did everything by the book, and still I'm struggling with all this. And I always used to hide it from people, be ashamed of what I was going through. And then I started to look around and be like, all of these opportunities that are coming in my life are actually because of my mental illness. So I never would have been asked to speak at the Global Mental Health Summit if I hadn't struggled, if I hadn't gone through this and had this experience and grown from it. So I've kind of shifted my focus and be like, this is something that's a part of me, and I'm going to turn it into one of my strengths. And I had the chance to go and talk to the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, so Will and Kate. It was super, super cool. We met with ministers from around the world, talking about why talking about mental health is so important, especially as youth. So I'm 24 years old right now, kind of on the cusp of being a youth. So I'm like phasing out of that. But these conversations are so important because there's no one who knows our mental health like ourselves. No one can tell us what we need. No one can tell us what we can do to make ourselves feel better. It's whatever works for us, and it's going to be different for different people. So that's a little bit about the mental health space and being South Asian and growing up in this. As a woman, I feel like we're often silenced and told we can't do things a certain way, but I just want all of the people in the room, women, men, all of us alike, we all have a voice, and it's always important sharing our experience. This is your story. You're the narrator. You can steer this however you want, and make sure you take that power. Thank you.
Thank you. As an organization, we sort of run parallel, so we definitely look to work together again in the future. So thank you so much for sharing that. I know it wasn't easy, but thank you. Next up, we have Tracie Wagwan. She is an entrepreneurial executive with a rich history and career. Tracie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Okay, I'm at the airport. So I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for having me. What you're doing is really important. And I know it's a volunteer-run organization, but this issue affects everybody. And if anything, the stories that I've just heard show that you never know what someone's going through. And it's really important to destigmatize these conversations and make it okay to talk about. You know, I grew up with parents who were mentally ill and friends who committed suicide and friends who had mental, disorders. And, it's really important that you are able to find someone to talk to about it, and at least organizations like this exist. So, and with that, I remember very vividly what it was like to be a teenager, like almost too vividly, no matter how long ago it was. I remember how hard those years were, trying to find yourself, awkward in your own body, not understanding what's happening to your skin, trying to navigate social situations and being pushed to know what you need to do for the rest of your life. And although the same issues arise for teens in every era, and mental illness is one of them, I can't help but feel it's so much worse in the digital era. Teenage girls especially are under immense pressure. Their suicide rates are higher than boys. They are twice as likely to be depressed and anxious. And there are so many distractions, fierce competition and issues facing the world seem even more dire. And now I have 2 teenagers in my house, and I feel a tremendous amount of empathy as I watch them navigate. And I love talking to my teen kids and their friends. And many times I prefer talking to the teenagers than I do the adults. Teens are the ones who are changing the world. They are doing March for Their Lives. They're taking gun control into their own hands, and they're making voting registration happen. They're so open, curious, and more aware than I ever was at their age. They are smart and savvy and have incredible bullshit detectors. Can I say that? Teens are much maligned in the press, but my experience with them is great, and I especially love talking to teenage girls. They helped me research my new app when it was just a concept. Teenage girls are early adopters of technology, and in many cases, they are trendsetters. These girls provided me with open and honest feedback when I launched Twirl, and they have been super users and my best source of product information. I've added and deleted functionality because of that. Twirl exists because I see how social media affects teenage girls and how they use technology today. I wanted to create a safe space for them to share information and pictures with their friends and be open, authentic, but most importantly, make it private. I know that many adults today face the same issues that teens have. Fear of missing out, social media addiction, but often we understand that these are minor issues in the big picture of life. For teens, these issues can seem like their whole world at that exact moment. The bullying and trolling is hard for anyone, but for teens, it can seem like everything has crashed all around you. It's so important that teenage girls, all teens and teenage girls especially, know that social media, and quite frankly, almost all media really, isn't real. That party looks really fun and that picture seemed perfect, but it took 100 takes and the party was pretty lame. But even if it was fun, it's okay if you weren't there and you have to remind yourself over and over again. It's okay not to be at that party. It's okay not to look like that Instagram model. It's okay to turn off your phone and even delete some of those apps, even for a little while. It's okay to ignore the trolls and to turn off the comments. You are not missing anything. And there's so much more to come that's going to be so much better. You'll have good days and bad days, but each day is a gift. If you need to talk to someone, there are people who care, even this organization. You can message me anytime. Don't compare yourself to other people. It's an impossible task, and it's not worth it. You are enough. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tracie. What a powerful message. Definitely one that resonated and something that I would love to learn and then further on teach. You both have brought up really amazing points that I actually want to sort of make the focal point of the discussion. It may be a very a difficult question to answer, but Jessie, you mentioned how it started at home and then you were exposed to the world and then you learned a little bit more about it. Tracie, you're working with the demographics. So one thing that I want to ask you guys is, with our new generation technology and resources that we do have at the moment for the young girls, their partners, their parents even, that are going through this, that are facing a stressor that may be a little bit different from our generation, what would you say to them? How would they, what would you say to somebody going through that?
I can start. So I would say social media is a tool, just like anything else, just like we had newspapers and magazines back in the day. I mean, they're still around, but it's a tool that we can use for our benefit if we know how to use it. So instead of inherently assuming it's bad, we should be teaching our girls and teaching our children how we can use it for good. For myself, social media made a huge difference in my life. Starting the Mental Health Spotlight, it's all social media. I don't meet people physically in person all the time. I'm not running workshops in person. These are online conversations that we're having, and I've been able to create a community of supportive individuals from around the world, making the world much smaller and much closer, through the use of hashtags, through having these Instagram accounts, connecting with random people from around the world. And for myself, it definitely took a lot of self-learning and figuring out what works for me and what doesn't. For example, I myself struggled with a lot of body image issues growing up. So seeing those Instagram models being stick thin and Kim Kardashian and all of that stuff, it gets in my head. So I make a conscious decision not to follow those accounts on social media. Of course, I still check in and I still want to know what's going on. But seeing that every day, it gets in your head and you want to be aware of what you're taking in. Social media is kind of your personal curation of what you want and what you're putting your attention to. You're going to get more of that back. So we have to teach our children and our girls that we can use this, but we have to be careful and be wary. Like Tracie said, what you see on social media isn't real. It takes 100 takes for one good picture. That person went on vacation 6 weeks ago and now they're posting it now just because they need a little bit of a boost. So it's keeping all of that in mind, and I think,
and show people what's real. And I have conversations with all the teens in my life, and there's a lot of them, every single day, that this isn't real, this is fake, turn it off, you don't have to read that, this isn't true, and unfollow those accounts. And it takes that, it's almost an everyday thing. And I mean, it's not even just teens, it's me too. Like, I unfollow accounts, just like Jessie said. This is not helping me, this is not making me feel good. And my daughter just deleted Snapchat and Instagram for a while. Like, she's like, it's too much, I have too much going on, and I don't care. Whatever I need to find out, I will find out.
That's fantastic. I remember when I was in university, a lot of my friends and I, we would delete Facebook for the duration of the exams and then come right back after. So technology is a wonderful tool. We are using it ourselves to further this organization. And I know you guys are doing great things with it as well for your individual organizations. One of the things that here at Reach Out Together that we are basically trying to bridge the gap and fill in the space. For us, we find that there is still a disconnect even today. Where there's so much knowledge and information available, there's still a huge disconnect between what you're feeling when you initially feel it at a young age, or after a traumatic experience. You feel the emotions that sort of trigger that this could lead to a mental health issue. So from that point up until the point where you actually realize that, yes, I need help, there's still a big gap. And we're trying to fill in that by educating those who are with people who are going through it. What do you guys feel within your individual organizations and past experiences? What is the main challenge here to put that gap together?
I really think it's destigmatization. Mm-hmm. I mean, I almost wish we called it brain health. Like, maybe that would make it sound less scary for people. But you have to know that it's okay. I mean, even for Jessie to be like, I'm depressed, like, it's so many people are, and it's okay. And so we have to make it like, I'm just not good right now. You know, I need some help. I need you to talk. I need someone to talk to. And so we have to make it okay to talk about, and find people to talk to about it, like your organization or Jessie's. Like, it's really important that it becomes destigmatized. I know I keep repeating myself, but I think more people than we know are going through issues like this, and we have to be able to talk. You have to be able to talk about it and find help. Now, the internet and social media is a great tool for that, right? If you could find people who are going through what you're going through, then you would actually feel less alone. So there's a way to use it for good.
For sure, and I would agree. These conversations, I think, have to be integrated into everyday life. Like I said before, mental health is something we have with us at all times, just like our physical health. We have days when we're doing fine. Maybe it's really cold outside and you forgot to wear a scarf and now you've got the flu, whatever it may be. Same with our mental health. There are things that are going to stress us out. And I think we need to get to the point where we're having these conversations regularly and not waiting for the point where we're struggling, where we're catching it when we're just stressed out, and we can take care of it with some self-care, whether that's taking some time off of work, whether that's taking back some responsibilities. And instead of waiting for it to become a struggling or crisis situation where you do need a doctor, where you do need medication, helping deal with those little issues as they come up will help build that resiliency and stop that from happening. But of course, like, there are other issues like biological things that may come into play, and it's different for everyone. But if we all kind of commit to taking care of ourselves first, we'll be able to help those around us. And I'm a big believer that if you can't take care of yourself first, you can't help those around you. And that's kind of my motivation. Like, I want to be able to take care of my family. I want to be able to be there for my siblings and whoever else. So I want to make sure I'm okay in order to do that.
And I also would add one more thing, is that if you are okay, check in on your friends, check in on people, just say hi. Sometimes they just need to know that there's someone there. So just always check in, even if it's someone you think is really strong, because you never know what people are going through.
Definitely.
Absolutely. It's hard to find the time. I really do want to thank both of you, Tracie and Jessie, for your time. I know, Tracie, you're in an airport. Hopefully I'm not making it.
Yeah. Nope, just getting on my flight now.
All right, it's a great time to wrap up. Thank you, Jessie. Thank you, Tracie. Have a safe flight.